Ladies and gentlemen, it's such a pleasure to be speaking at an EYC platform 23 years after I became an EYC member, in the days when I still was a European young conservative. My goodness, this organization has flourished since then. It's expanded its number of member parties, its range of activities, and it is a very welcome, valued member of the European family, doing great work to advance our common principles, summarized beautifully in what still remains the EYC slogan from my time in the early 90s: free peoples, free nations, free markets. One thing that I think I've learned in the intervening 23 years is to cheer up. Like a lot of conservatives, my inclination is sometimes to expect the worst. It's the besetting sin of the conservative movement. Perhaps the most conservative prime minister that my country has ever produced was the third Marquis of Salisbury. He was prime minister at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. He was talking about a crisis in Bulgaria, but it could summarize his entire approach to life. He once said, "If anything changes, it will be for the worse, and it's therefore in our interest that as little should change as possible." And for a lot of conservatives, that seems a very reasonable take on the world. After all, the world is not a perfect place from a conservative point of view. Taxes are too high, the state is too powerful, we see our children being loaded with debt, our values being traduced, our patriotism scorned. It's very easy to become angry. But if you give in to anger, you come across as curmudgeonly. Or in religious terms, you give in to the sin of despair. It's something that we can very easily, I catch myself doing it sometimes. You start moaning about all the things that you don't like, the audience is nodding along, and at the end, nobody feels any better. You haven't convinced anybody to come with you because you haven't offered a better alternative. And I want to explore why it is that this pessimism seems to be so hardwired into the human species. And I want to analyze whether it's really well-founded. For as long as I can remember, there has always been some looming catastrophe. No one ever had difficulty publishing a book predicting that things are about to get worse. And it's never actually happened. You know, this is something that could have been said at any time back to the age of Seneca, right? The world stubbornly gets better, and yet people always think that the good times are about to end. There was a very famous British historian and politician, a Whig member of Parliament called Lord Macaulay. And back in the 1830s, he made a brilliant observation in one of his history books. He said, "Why is it that looking behind us and seeing only steady improvement, we glance forward and seem to descry only deterioration?" That was in the 1830s. Think of how much more aptly those words apply today. From one panic to another, teen pregnancies, binge drinking, whatever it is, we're always expecting the worst to happen. When I was a boy, we were all very worried about global cooling and the coming ice age. Now it's global warming. It could be bird flu or it could be swine flu. It could be asteroid strikes or nuclear obliteration, but the argument is always the same. This time it's going to be different. Yes, things have all been getting better up until now, but the good times are surely about to come to an end. And yet, on every measure, most people in most countries at most times are living longer, healthier, and more fulfilled lives than ever. You can measure literacy or longevity or infant mortality. You can measure access to healthcare. You can measure calorie intake. You can measure height on any of the key metrics. There has never been a better time to be alive than now. And there is absolutely no reason to expect that tendency to slow. Now, why is it that things are stubbornly getting better? What is it that has made this such a golden age for the human species? Well, here I come back to the founding ideology of EYC and of the wider conservative movement. It's actually very easy to identify the thing that is making us richer and healthier and happier. It's the recognition of property rights and free exchange that create a free society. Some people really have a difficulty with that. It seems somehow counterintuitive that a straightforward profit motive should have done so much to lift the standards of living of the poorest, and yet the facts speak for themselves. In 1992, the United Nations set itself the goal of halving extreme poverty, defined then as living on $1 a day or less. By now, actually, it's fallen by 2/3. And the fall is accelerating. And who has done most to accelerate that fall in extreme poverty in the world? Where has the fall been steepest? In those parts of Asia and Africa that have opened their markets to the global trading system. For decades, the Western world made huge transfers through international aid to sub-Saharan Africa. And any impact on the standard of living was negligible. Then, mobile phones began to spread across the continent, and suddenly the living standard began to increase. Now, as I say, a lot of people think that somehow that's uncomfortable. They don't like the idea that what should have raised living standards in Africa is not a charitable initiative, but is the naked profit motive, the greed, to use their word, of the mobile phone operators. And yet, from the point of view of the beneficiaries, who cares what the motive was? Right? It's so easy when you sit in a wealthy, comfortable, developed country to say GDP isn't everything. Well, the rise of GDP in Africa, one of the miracles of this century, means vaccines and bicycles and school books. It means that your children are less likely to die in infancy. It means that you have solid work. It means an end to hunger. It means a secure shelter. We are transforming the lives of people not by top-down planning, not by state intervention, not by any policy whatever, except that of moving the rocks and letting the grass grow. That's the true miracle of our age. This is the first time in the history of planet Earth when most people have been free to fulfill their own ambitions through their own endeavors. The first time when our relationships with other individuals have not been mediated by caste and tradition. The first time that we've been able to hold our governments to account, and when the state has been run by and for the people who live there rather than as an oligarchy. It's so natural, so easy to take for granted the things that we are familiar with. But we are living in exceptional times. Consider the history of this city, Antalya, since we're here. It was founded, we read, by a Greek king, Attalus, from whom it takes its name, Attalus of Pergamum. A little bit, I think about 150 BC, something like that. Okay? It was then transferred to the Roman Empire. It was one of those territories that effectively sold itself to the Roman Republic. It then eventually became Byzantine and then Ottoman. And throughout all of that time, it was run by and for a tiny oligarchic clique who systematically looted the state in order to live off the work of everybody else. Like the rest of the world, the history of this city was really the story of a tiny number of people who had inherited privileged positions while 99% of the population lived short lives in the fields. That has been the story of post-agrarian humanity for 10,000 years. It didn't take long from the discovery of farming for somebody to make the immediate next discovery, which is that it's easier to steal somebody else's crop than to spend all year toiling in your own fields. And it's better yet, in terms of the ratio of effort to reward, to regularize that seizure of the other person's crops through tithes and tolls and taxes. And thus the first states were born as protection rackets. Everywhere, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, it was the same pattern. A gang of people got into a position where they could legally and systematically loot the wealth of the territory under their control and then rig the rules so that their children would inherit the same prerogatives. The medieval European monarchy, in that sense, was really politically no different from a modern African kleptocracy. This is the one bit of their analysis that I think the Marxists get right. They understand the basically exploitative nature, because humankind is rapacious, that will happen when there are not structures in place to constrain the self-interest of the powerful, to make the people in positions of authority answerable to everybody else. Bertolt Brecht wrote a poem called A Worker Reads History. And he imagines what it was like for the normal people, not the people that the history books remember. Who built the 7 gates of Thebes, he wrote. The books are filled with the names of kings. Was it the kings who hauled the craggy blocks of stone? And Babylon, so many times destroyed, who built it up again each time? Those Iron Age empires, those slave empires, were not really so very different from 19th century societies in much of Asia, Africa, and parts of Europe. And in every case, the people in charge were resistant to any technology that would threaten their place. And that was why human progress was so slow, until a miracle, the most extraordinary transformative moment in the history of our species, the sublime idea came about that the rulers shouldn't get to make up the rules. That being king didn't mean that you could get to make things up as you went along. That there was something above you. Something that you couldn't see or hear or touch or taste, but that bound the king as surely as it bound the poorest man in the kingdom. And that something was the law. And from the rule of law flow all the other freedoms that we now take for granted. Down to meritocracy and democracy and equality between the sexes and uncensored newspapers and jury trial, all of those things, all of them have their root in the extraordinary idea that the rules are above the government. It's an imaginative exercise, and yet everywhere where it's been tried, it has lifted living standards and it has made people happier and freer. As I say, it's so easy to take familiar things for granted. We don't pause and stop about the miracle that happens every time the free market works and brings to our front door riches that were beyond the dreams of those Iron Age emperors, those kings recorded as having built the 7 gates of Thebes. G.K. Chesterton, the theologian, once said that we are perishing for want of wonder, not for want of wonders. Think of the extraordinary wonder that happens when you buy a tin of baked beans. Think of everything that has gone in to that can. The smelting of the aluminium, the trees that had to be felled in order to make the paper on the wrapper, and all the incidental people, the accountant and the lorry driver, and the people who were making cups of coffee for the people smelting the aluminium, and all of that. And it comes to your front door at a price that means that someone on the minimum wage can buy it with 11 minutes of work. What an extraordinary miracle that is. You find me any medieval king who could have achieved that kind of living standard, that kind of extraordinary gift. And what delivers that? It's the miracle of the markets. Specialization. Allowing people in rational pursuit of their self-interest to offer a service to people around them. What I'm really trying to do is to abolish this way of thinking that says, all right, markets may be efficient and it's true, they work better than any other system, but isn't there something more to life? We all hear this, don't we, from our left-wing friends. You know, what you're saying makes perfect sense if you're just interested in account keeping. But isn't there much more? Are we not in danger of missing the important things, friends and family and values? Human nature is fixed. Right? It's not something that's changed by whether you live in a capitalist or a socialist country. The desire for material gain is hardwired into us. It's a product of our DNA, or if you prefer, it's how we're made by the Almighty. The only question for the politicians is how to design a system where that desire for material improvement, that greed, if we want to use the left-wing word for it, is harnessed in a socially useful way. And under every other system ever tried, the way to prosper is through cronyism and favoritism. The way to get ahead is to suck up to the commissars or the kings or the priests or whoever it is that runs the society. Only the free market allows you to achieve your ambition, to fulfill your greed, if we have to use that phrase, by offering a service to the people around you. It's the one system where genius is turned outward, where the inventive people make and sell things for the mass market instead of for the oligarchs and the elites. That's what makes our age so special. And that's why we as conservatives should take pride in being the inventors and now the custodians of those things that have served to make mankind free. I want to leave time for your questions. So let me just come back to that old EYC slogan, free peoples, free nations, free markets. Free peoples. We should be as free as possible from coercion. You need a very good reason to tell somebody that they can't voluntarily do something which doesn't take away the greater freedom of somebody else. Free markets allow people to pursue their own interests, and they will do more to elevate the standard of living than any number of committees. No group of government bureaucrats, if they were the best and wisest people in the world, could ever have invented this. Nobody, by planning, can come up with the things that lift our standard of living in the same way that enlightened self-interest will. And free nations? Well, free nations because the best and securest vessel of democracy is a unit within which we feel enough in common with one another to accept government from each other's hands. That exists within a nation state. It doesn't exist within a supranational empire. And that's why the trend in most of the world outside the European Union, the trend is towards the devolution, dispersal, and democratization of power. And that's why, my friends, things will get better. That's why all of those pessimists, including the younger me, were wrong. That's why, despite this psychological need to think that the worst is coming, we keep being confounded. Our children will live longer, healthier, happier, and more fulfilled lives than we did. And that same sentence could have been spoken at any time in the last 400 years, and it would have always been met with skepticism, but it would always have been true. The future is bright.